Amidst the ancient karst mountains of Guizhou province, where mists curl like whispered secrets through narrow valleys, lies a small city whose streets hum with quiet rhythms of daily life. The mid-1990s brought a sense of change and hope, yet beneath this fragile calm, unseen shadows began to lengthen, setting the stage for a mystery that would haunt the province for years to come. December 1994 was a bitterly cold month, when the first tragedy surfaced. An elderly woman foraging for medicinal herbs stumbled upon a horrifying scene: the lifeless body of a young woman sprawled in the frost-bitten grass. The community, once wrapped in winter's quiet, now trembled under a wave of dread and disbelief, unsure of what darkness had crept into their midst. The victim's identity remained a haunting mystery. The relentless passage of time and nature's elements had erased the features that might have offered clues. Without the advanced forensic tools commonplace today, investigators were left grappling with scant evidence, their hope waning as the harsh winter deepened the silence around this unresolved loss. This grim discovery was only the beginning. Over the next 6 years, a series of brutal murders unfolded throughout Guizhou and neighboring Guangxi provinces. Each victim was a young woman, found under chillingly similar circumstances. The terror spread quietly, a shadow stalking the province's forgotten corners, leaving families shattered and communities paralyzed by fear. Most victims lived on society's margins, working nights in hidden trades or isolated environments. Their invisibility made them prey to a predator exploiting societal neglect. These women, fragile and vulnerable, became silent martyrs of a darkness few dared to acknowledge openly. Local authorities faced profound challenges. Witnesses, fearful of retribution, remained silent. Limited forensic capabilities and cultural stigma compounded the difficulty. The police stations in rural Guizhou and Guangxi became crucibles of frustration, where detectives worked tirelessly against the growing tide of despair and unanswered questions. Within homes, the air grew thick with unease. Mothers clutched their daughters closer, families whispered warnings, and neighbors cast suspicious glances at strangers. A creeping suspicion permeated daily life, a quiet question hanging in the cold air: who could be next, and how could this menace remain hidden? The crime scenes revealed a disturbing pattern. Despite the violence, victims' clothes were folded with eerie care beside their bodies, no signs of a struggle left behind. This unsettling tidiness suggested a perpetrator exercising cruel control, a dark ritual marking each atrocity with a signature of perverse respect. Forensic psychologists later debated this behavior as a manifestation of deep psychological pathology, an urge to dominate even in death, leaving behind a twisted message to the community. It was a grim testament to the mind behind the horrors, intertwining brutality with ritualistic precision. Despite mounting pressure, police investigations often hit dead ends. The scarcity of witnesses and minimal forensic breakthroughs forced reliance on traditional detective work, interviews, neighborhood canvassing, and painstaking analysis. Yet the killer remained elusive, his shadow growing longer with each passing month. The city's nights grew quieter as fear took root. Shops shuttered earlier, women avoided solitary walks, and neighbors viewed one another with newfound caution. The vibrant pulse of daily life slowed, replaced by a community bound together by shared anxiety and unanswered fears. Speculation swirled about a solitary predator, a ghost moving unseen through city streets and mountain paths. But whispers also hinted at darker possibilities: systemic neglect, cultural taboos, and fractured social structures that enabled evil to fester in silence. Rumors circulated of a figure cloaked in invisibility, a man who preyed on society's forgotten. His existence was a specter haunting the collective consciousness, a reminder that beneath the surface of everyday life, unspeakable horrors could quietly unfold. Yet, beyond the veil of fear, there was a call to confront painful truths, the fragility of human life, the dangers of societal neglect, and the imperative that only light through awareness and justice could dispel the gathering darkness. And so, as the city wrestled with these chilling losses, the question burned ever stronger in the hearts of its people: what dark shadows linger behind the mountains of Guizhou, and what price must be paid to bring them into the light? As months turned to years, a grim pattern became impossible to ignore. Each victim shared haunting similarities: young women living on society's fringes, often found in the shadowed streets or hidden corners of southern Chinese cities. Their transient lives wove a dark tapestry, reflecting both vulnerability and neglect, drawing the attention of weary investigators desperate for answers. The killer's modus operandi revealed a chilling method: victims were lured with false promises, subdued through ruthless violence, and left with unervingly folded clothes beside their bodies. This dark ritual suggested a calculated psyche, one that sought not only to kill but to control and torment beyond the act of murder itself. Police forensic experts pored over minute details, recognizing the killer's psychological warfare. Each crime scene was a carefully crafted tableau of fear and power, where brutality intertwined with ritualistic precision, manipulating both victims and community in a sinister game. Victims' backgrounds offered haunting context. Many were isolated by poverty, family estrangement, or trapped in cycles of exploitation. This vulnerability, often invisible to society, rendered them easy prey, while cultural stigmas prevented open discussion and reporting, deepening their silent suffering. Among them was Mei Ling, a quiet dreamer working late nights in a city salon. Her hopes of a better future were extinguished too soon, emblematic of countless others whose lives went unnoticed, whose pain was buried beneath societal indifference. Whispers of shadow networks and hidden refuges for marginalized women began circulating. These spaces, meant for safety, often trapped victims in cycles of control and fear, blurring the lines between survival and victimization, complicating the investigation's path toward justice. For many families, the disappearance of loved ones was shrouded in shame or fear. Many victims went unreported, their absence quietly mourned in isolation. The justice system's reach felt distant, and cultural taboos silenced cries for help, fostering a dangerous culture of neglect. Psychologists analyzing the case later described the killer as a man driven by a toxic mix of hatred and a twisted need for dominance. Each murder was not just an act of violence but a message, a dark dialogue reflecting his fractured psyche and societal grievances. Law enforcement grappled with limited resources and bureaucratic obstacles. Despite outdated technology and social stigma hampering cooperation, a determined core of officers worked tirelessly, bridging provincial divides in an unprecedented united front against the growing threat. Victims like Lin Xia, caught between tradition and the harsh realities of modernization, became poignant symbols of society's failures. Their stories ignited a fragile hope, that through recognition and action, the cycle of silence and violence might finally be broken. Amid despair, voices of survivors emerged, breaking years of silence. Their courage fueled renewed determination among investigators and communities, forging a path toward healing and justice through shared stories of pain and resilience. Investigators pieced together fragments of a grim puzzle: victims' lives, the killer's habits, the community's silence. This tangled web revealed painful societal fractures, challenging assumptions and exposing uncomfortable truths about neglect and marginalization. Ultimately, the emerging pattern held up a mirror to society, reflecting its vulnerabilities, fears, and failures. It posed a haunting question: how can healing begin when terror stalks the most vulnerable, cloaked in the shadows of indifference? These dark events remind us that evil often festers where neglect and prejudice hide. Only through compassion, awareness, and vigilant courage can communities light a path forward, turning silence into strength. And as the province wrestled with its grief and fear, a burning question remained: what must be done to unmask the darkness and reclaim the light hidden behind Guizhou's mist-covered mountains? In the dense shadows of Guizhou's remote outskirts, where fear silenced many, one voice dared to break the silence: Tudm, a young woman whose survival would rewrite the narrative of terror. Her story became a beacon of hope, revealing the darkness that had long been ignored and sparking a renewed determination for justice. Tudm's days were marked by caution, working late in a small mahjong parlor, always alert to the world's dangers. Unaware of the nightmare awaiting her, she carried quiet dreams of freedom, her heart beating defiantly even in the darkest hours. Her attacker, disguised as a railway employee, moved with deceptive kindness. His gentle words masked a sinister intent, luring her away under the guise of trust. This cruel duality haunted Tudm's memory, a stark reminder of how appearances can deceive. Walking toward the mountain trails, a place traditionally associated with peace and reflection, Tudm's hope faltered. The serene landscape transformed into a stage for terror, where her will to survive was tested against unimaginable odds. When the nightmare unfolded, Tudm fought with fierce resilience. Despite physical overpowering, she refused to surrender her spirit. Her desperate cries shattered the silence, marking the first cracks in the killer's cold facade. Her escape was a testament to human will, fleeing through thorny underbrush and dark trails, driven by raw survival instinct. Each painful step echoed the hope that no darkness is absolute, and life's spark can never be fully extinguished. Survival was only the beginning. Tudm bore invisible wounds, the trauma lingering long after physical scars healed. Yet, her bravery in recounting her ordeal ignited a fire within a community desperate to confront its fears and seek justice. Her testimony painted a chilling portrait of the perpetrator's cruelty and cunning. It revealed not only the brutality inflicted but also the calculated psychological torment woven into each act, a terrifying glimpse into a fractured mind. Tudm's courage inspired others, women who carried silent stories of survival and pain, whose voices had long been drowned by fear. Together, their testimonies began to unravel the web of terror that had ensnared their communities. Her ordeal laid bare the precarious existence of marginalized women, isolated, vulnerable, and often invisible. It exposed the dangerous invisibility that predators exploit and the cultural silence that allows such tragedies to continue. Law enforcement's resolve hardened following Tudm's testimony. Cooperation across provinces intensified, fueled by the clarity her words brought, transforming the investigation from scattered efforts into a determined, unified pursuit. Her story also awakened community awareness. Families began to listen, believe, and act. This shifting tide promised to break cycles of silence, changing the future for those still vulnerable to shadows. Tudm's legacy transcended survival. It became a call for justice, compassion, and societal change, a light piercing the darkness, urging all to stand against fear and neglect. Her voice guided the investigation forward, shattering the veil of terror with truth and resilience. Through her, the community learned that no darkness is eternal and no silence absolute. Yet beneath the courage lay a profound question: how does one heal from nightmares so deep, and what becomes of the soul that refuses to break? TUDM's journey was as much about survival as it was about reclaiming humanity. In the murky depths of Guizhou's shadowed alleys, the name Kwok Long Hai began to surface, a man whose calm demeanor concealed a heart steeped in darkness. To understand the terror that gripped the provinces, one must peer deeply into the twisted mind of this calculating predator. Born into hardship, Kwok Long Hai's early years were marked by violence and neglect. A childhood riddled with broken trust and lost chances set him on a perilous path, one where bitterness and rage slowly consumed his fragile soul. His first brushes with the law, a conviction for sexual assault, revealed cracks in his psyche, a man struggling to balance twisted desires with a fractured conscience, his resentment toward women deepening into dangerous obsession. After his release, Kwok Long Hai's thirst for control only intensified. Intelligence turned into cunning, survival skills morphed into tools of terror. His outward calm masked a storm of cruelty and cold calculation. He chose victims carefully, vulnerable women marginalized by society, invisible to many but painfully present to him. Each attack was not random, but a deliberate act of domination and psychological torment. The sheer brutality shocked even veteran investigators. His crimes were a disturbing blend of violence and cold precision, a terrifying assertion of power over life and death that shook communities to their core. Yet beneath the ruthless facade lay a man haunted by inner demons: rejection, insignificance, and an insatiable hunger for control consumed what little humanity remained within him. Psychologists would later describe Kwok Long Hai as the embodiment of psychopathy: charming yet deceitful, intelligent yet remorseless, a soul fractured beyond repair by darkness within. His modus operandi was chilling: meticulous planning, scene manipulation, use of disguises. He left little trace, weaving through the shadows like a ghost, prolonging terror and evading capture. Friends and family recalled grudges and bitterness, a man consumed by hatred for women, blaming them for his failures. This festering resentment erupted into a series of horrific crimes, leaving scars that would not heal. In the courtroom, Kwok Long Hai's mask of civility crumbled. The calm facade gave way to a chilling revelation of a calculating killer, his mind a labyrinth of cruelty and manipulation. Comparisons to infamous global serial killers were drawn, yet his story was uniquely Chinese, a dark reflection of societal fractures, cultural taboos, and the shadows lurking beneath rapid modernization. His downfall was a stark reminder of justice's reach and limits. Beneath every polite facade can lurk unspeakable darkness, emerging when vigilance falters. As the investigation closed, the question remained: what lies beneath the mask of a monster? A broken humanity? Or a soul lost in an abyss from which it could never return? Understanding Kwok Long Hai's darkness does not excuse it, but it compels us to confront uncomfortable truths about the fragility of society, the shadows we fail to see, and the vigilance we must uphold. The investigation stretched beyond Guizhou into Guangxi province, a vast terrain of mountains and rivers where the killer's trail twisted through villages and city streets. Local police forces, unprepared for such darkness, pooled resources, determined to weave together the scattered threads of horror into a net of justice. Every discovery deepened the mystery. Victims often found days or weeks after death, bodies ravaged by time and elements, hampering forensic efforts. Yet tireless detectives pressed on, combing through crime scenes with patience born of grim resolve, piecing together fragments of shattered lives. Technology in the 1990s. Rural China was limited. DNA testing was a luxury few precincts could afford. Investigators relied on witness testimonies, behavioral profiling, and old-fashioned legwork, long hours tracking leads, knocking on doors, and coaxing fearful voices to speak. As news spread, communities grew anxious yet more vigilant. Neighborhood watches formed, late-night walks ceased, and whispers of the killer's presence haunted conversations. Fear was pervasive, but so too was a growing determination to reclaim safety. A breakthrough came with the courageous testimony of Tu Diem, a survivor who escaped death's grasp. Her vivid recollections breathed life into cold files, detailing the predator's methods and shattering the silence that had protected him for so long. Tu Diem's words galvanized investigators. Her bravery inspired renewed efforts, spurring cooperation between Guizhou and Guangxi authorities and launching new strategies to capture the elusive killer who had terrorized the region. Despite growing pressure, the killer's shadow loomed large. His calculated moves, disguised tactics, and intimate knowledge of local terrain allowed him to slip through the grasp of justice, fueling frustration and fear alike. The chase was a test of endurance and wit, with detectives pursuing leads across cities and villages, unraveling the tangled web of crime amid cultural barriers and limited resources. Pressure mounted not only on law enforcement but on the judicial system, tasked with balancing public demand for swift justice against the meticulous collection of evidence and preservation of fairness. After years of relentless pursuit, the break finally came. Kwok Longhai was apprehended quietly in a Guangzhou apartment complex, his facade shattered by the mounting weight of evidence and the unwavering courage of survivors. His arrest marked not the end but a new beginning, one defined by courtroom battles, psychological examinations, and a community's painful reckoning with its own fears and failings. The trial revealed the depths of Kwok Longhai's cruelty, each detail of his crimes exposed in a somber courtroom where victims' voices finally found acknowledgement. The verdict brought a fragile peace. Life imprisonment stood as society's stern message, a condemnation of betrayal and a hope for justice to heal the wounds inflicted. For families, the sentence was both relief and sorrow, a chapter closing, yet memories and scars remaining, urging vigilance and compassion into the future. This case underscored a timeless truth: justice extends beyond punishment. It is a path toward healing, for victims, families, and society alike. In the aftermath of tragedy, the community found itself holding a mirror reflecting on the cracks that allowed such darkness to thrive unseen. Guizhou and Guangxi provinces wrestled not just with grief but with the urgent need to face uncomfortable truths. The stories of the victims unveiled more than violence, they exposed social fractures where poverty, stigma, and neglect intertwined. Marginalized women, dismissed by society, became silent witnesses to the failure of protection. Many victims lived in the shadows, their lives marked by isolation and vulnerability. The culture's silence on these issues created fertile ground where predators acted with impunity, and voices were stifled by fear and shame. This pervasive silence allowed suffering to fester. It underscored the critical need for communities to listen, believe, and act, breaking the cycle that leaves victims unseen and unheard. Experts emphasize that true understanding demands more than law enforcement. It calls for societal awakening, challenging stigma, educating youth, and nurturing compassion to build safer environments. From sorrow rose social movements advocating stronger protections and victim support, demanding transparency and accountability within institutions long shadowed by neglect. Yet, change faces resistance. Deep-rooted cultural norms and systemic inertia challenge progress, requiring persistent courage from activists, communities, and policymakers alike. Law alone cannot heal wounds. Empathy must infuse daily life-transforming attitudes and inspiring action that uplifts the vulnerable and dismantles cycles of neglect. Stories like these spotlight the urgency to listen deeply to marginalized voices, to believe survivors, and to build networks of safety that honor dignity and courage. Education stands as a powerful shield teaching respect, equality, and the courage to confront injustice, sowing seeds for a safer future generation by generation. From grassroots campaigns to legislative reforms, each effort forms a mosaic of hope, a collective promise that silence will no longer be the shelter for cruelty. But these lessons come with a painful warning: darkness can seep into even thriving communities if vigilance fades and compassion wanes. Each story, each loss, compels us to examine our roles within families, neighborhoods, and society to act before silence births more sorrow. The past cannot be changed, but the future remains unwritten, shaped by compassion, awareness, and courageous choices made today. In this shared responsibility lies the true legacy of those lost, a call to protect, to listen, and to transform grief into strength. As the sun rises over the misty mountains of Guizhou, the city awakens not just to a new day, but to a renewed spirit, one forged from sorrow, resilience, and the collective promise to protect every life. The families of the lost, though broken by grief, have become beacons of courage. Their quiet strength inspires a community to embrace healing and pursue justice with unwavering resolve. Our shared humanity beckons us beyond mourning, to build bridges of understanding, to foster compassion, and to create safe havens for those once forgotten. Every step toward justice is a step toward restoration, healing wounds seen and unseen, stitching together the fabric of society torn by fear and silence. But true change blossoms within hearts, nurtured by empathy, education, and the courage to challenge injustice wherever it takes root. We remember Tudm, whose bravery pierced the silence. Her voice sparked a movement, lighting the way for countless others to reclaim theirs. Her story reminds us, even in the darkest nights, one small light can ignite a powerful blaze of change. Communities across Guizhou and Guangxi now stand united, weaving hope through vigilance, compassion, and the unwavering belief that safety is a right, not a privilege. We honor the memory of those lost, 15 lives forever etched in our hearts, and vow to protect all who remain from the shadows that once claimed them. Let us pledge to listen more closely to silenced voices, to stand firmly beside survivors, and to uproot hatred and fear with love and justice. In the face of darkness, our greatest strength lies in unity, hand in hand, generations standing together to defend dignity and life. As this story closes, we ask, what role will you choose to play in shaping a future where justice and compassion prevail? Your voice, your awareness, your actions, however small, are seeds of a safer, kinder world for generations yet to come. Thank you for walking this path with us. Please share your thoughts, stories, and hopes in the comments below. Together, we grow stronger. Remember, through understanding and unity, we cultivate not only justice, but healing, peace, and a world where no shadow remains unchecked.